Muslims in Europe, an integral part of society or a foreign body? A self-proclaimed march against the Islamization of Europe opens the question once again of the role of Muslims in the continent. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. Belgian police have arrested dozens of people for taking part in a banned protest against what they call the Islamization of Europe. Well, among them were two leaders from Belgium's far-right party, Vlaams Belang, one of whom is a member of the European Parliament. Well, scuffles broke out at the demo, which was timed to coincide with the anniversary of 9/11. Mohammed Shaqir reports the protest had been banned as a threat to public order.
Timed to coincide with the 6th anniversary of 9/11, their slogans included "No to Sharia law" and "Democracy, not theocracy." Despite a ban by the mayor of Brussels, around 200 protesters turned out, many of them with shaven heads. The demonstration was organized by a group calling itself Stop the Islamization of Europe, a loose alliance with roots in Germany, Britain and Denmark. The group had claimed 20,000 would descend on the Belgian capital, but only 1% of that number showed up. Their objective was to use the anniversary of September 11 to claim Islam is threatening democracy and the rule of law in Europe.
Either integrate in our fundamental values or they should leave. Their place is not here. If I go to Saudi Arabia, Iran or Indonesia, I will have to adapt. We asked for the same thing. We see that the governments of Europe are responding little by little to the Muslim community demands.
Some protesters held a wooden cross high above their heads. Others wore T-shirts bearing their message. But more than 100 police officers dressed in riot gear and backed by water cannons and helicopters closed off the streets around the EU headquarters, effectively containing the protest. As the protest turned violent, police clashed with some of the demonstrators. A few were arrested, including the leader of the far-right Flemish Interest Party, Vlaams Belang. Police arrested him face down on the ground and placed handcuffs on his wrists. From the US war on terror to Islamophobia in Europe, a significant portion of Europeans see the growing number of Muslims as a threat to their democratic way of life. They insist that Muslims living there should adapt or leave.
Well, joining us to discuss the issue are our guests from Turin, Italy, Dr. Christian Cavnert, Professor of Contemporary History and International Politics at Salford University. Thanks for being with us. Also from London, Dr. Azam Tamimi, Director of the Institute of Islamic Political Thought. Thanks for being with us. Let's start with Dr. Christian Cavnert. Let's try and get in the mind of those who support Vlaams Belang. Why are they so afraid of the presence of Muslims in Europe?
Well, I think we first need to remember who those demonstrators were. And in particular, the Vlaams Belang, the far-right Belgian party that is aiming to get rid of the state of Belgium in itself, and has consistently campaigned against foreigners. So those people that are very afraid of Muslims in Europe are also the very same people that are very afraid of foreigners and anything that is different in general. So I think it is very important to remember that.
If it's a fear of foreigners, a fear of immigration, surely there'd be more concern about perhaps immigration from Eastern Europe since the widening of the European Union than Muslims.
Actually, it's very interesting. The Vlaams Belang, I would say, has three different types of what they would consider foreigners that they're afraid of. I think the first type is the French-speaking minority in Belgium, the Walloons, that they're trying to, in a sense, get rid of by proclaiming an independent Flanders. The second type is certainly the Muslim minority in Belgium, there's no doubt about that. But there's an interesting third type, and that is the Jewish minority in Belgium as well. And in particular, their stronghold in Belgium, which is Antwerp, is characterized by both a strong minority of Muslims, but also a strong minority of Jews, both of which the Vlaams Belang is campaigning against.
All right, let's take interesting points you make there. Let's go over to Dr. Azam Tamimi in London. Is it a fear of all things foreign or a bit of Islamophobia? How do you see it?
I think Islam and the Muslims are easier to pick on in the current climate of tension as a result of the war on terrorism, as a result of the crisis in Iraq and in Palestine and elsewhere, and also because Muslims do challenge the given conceptions about modes of living here in the West. And I think these groups, the far-right groups, are opposed to freedom, are opposed to democracy. They use democracy and freedom as a justification to deny the others the right to be different, to disagree with them.
Do Muslims make themselves more of a target? You say they find it easier to pick on Muslims. Do Muslims themselves sometimes make themselves more of a target because of attacks that are at least blamed or attributed to Islamic groups?
Well, definitely some Muslims behave badly, but this doesn't by itself explain much. What explains more is this perception that is being also fueled by the media and by certain politicians, not least George Bush and his allies, that Islam is the other, Islam is the threat, and therefore something has to be done about it.
All right, Dr. Kavnert, how we're talking about what, a small far-right group? How representative are these people of mainstream European sentiment?
I think the Vlaams-Belang in Belgium has already become part of mainstream Belgian politics, certainly in Flanders. We're talking about a party which consistently scores around 30% of the votes in Flanders. And that is only in Flanders, however. It's not so much in the French-speaking part of Belgium.
Right, so when you look at the national, perhaps, picture, let alone a more sort of European continental picture, how a large representation do they have?
I think the Vlaams-Belang is probably the biggest example that we currently have in Europe. But if we go back a number of years, in Austria we had the far-right Freedom Party and Jörg Haider, who at the time in 1999, 2000, 2001 was scoring also around 30% of the votes. We've got the Lega Nord in Italy. We've got the far-right in France, Jean-Marie Le Pen. All of these parties do manage to score quite significant amount of votes, but the Vlaams-Belang is really as high as it gets in Europe, 30%. But we need to remember the Vlaams-Belang, though it is a very strong far-right party, doesn't get that amount of votes only by being anti-Muslim. Their main campaign issue is actually the destruction of Belgium. The main slogan is België barst, so Belgium destroy, which is partly one of the reasons why they're so strong in Flanders in particular. Historically, and they've derived from, if you like, the pro-Hitler collaborators in Belgium. And that, in a sense, then led into the foundation of the Vlaams Bloc, which was later banned in Belgium because they were deemed anti-constitutional, which is the reason why they're now called Vlaams-Belang and not Vlaams Bloc, right, because otherwise they couldn't be getting any funding anymore. All right, that's perhaps a picture of some of the other political motivations behind groups like this. Dr. Azam, do you think that economics sometimes plays a role in anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment, though?
Oh, indeed, indeed. In Britain, for instance, which I know better than the rest of Europe, the BNP, the British National Party, is quite influential in areas where there is tension because of the lack of jobs, because of unemployment, because of competition for jobs with other communities, such as in areas where the Bengalis are or the Pakistanis are, especially in the Bradford area or in Eastern London and some other places. And therefore, economics is used as a justification. There is no doubt that these are fascists, these are racists and xenophobes, but they justify their hatred of the other in terms of various policies. And the real danger here is that mainstream politicians
I'm sorry, I want to bring in now, actually joining us on the show is Bart Debbie. She's spokesman for the, or he's spokesman for the Vlaams Belang party at the Flemish Parliament, joining us from Antwerp, Belgium. Listening to some strong words there from Dr. Azzam Tamimi saying fascists, xenophobes. Your response to that?
Well, I'm not surprised. We are used to be given such names. And I'm not spoken to with those names. I'm not even interested anymore in those names. I consider them as compliments, because when our political opponents don't have any arguments but only that, to call us fascists and racists and all that kind of thing, then I believe we have already won. Now, the Vlaams Belang is a party, it's the biggest party in Flanders with 30% of the voters. And we have almost 1 million people who vote for our party, Vlaams Belang. It would be crazy to call 1 million people fascists and racists.
All right, but let's look at some of the slogans perhaps that have been raised by people associated or close to your party. No to Sharia, no to theocracy, you're defending democracy. Do you really believe there's even a chance of Sharia being introduced into Europe?
Well, let's see what is going on in this country, also in other countries, but in this country, more and more are we overwhelmed by Muslim immigrants. For an example, in Brussels, more than 50% of the population is immigrants from a Muslim origin. Most of them are actually Muslims. And we see every day that they don't tend to integrate in our society and don't adapt to our values and standards. Let me give you a few examples. In my own city, Antwerp, school meals are prepared halal for all pupils, regardless of their religion. Opening hours of public swimming pools are split up according to sexes, and so on and so on.
All right. Clearly some strong opinions there. I could see Dr. Christian Cavnert shaking his head in disagreement, but we do have to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll ask, are Muslims rejecting Europe? Is Europe rejecting them? Or is it none of the above? Stay with us.